You have heard about the ancient Silk Road, which connected China via a long trade route to Europe. It was an exchange of silk, porcelain, book printing, but more important than the goods was the exchange of technologies. The ancient Silk Road brought enormous economic benefits to all the countries participating. But it also was an exchange of ideas and beautiful cultures. Today, China is offering a new Silk Road and a maritime Silk Road. And already more than 60 countries are cooperating. China has made an economic miracle in the last 30 years, which brought a development which most industrial countries needed 150 to 200 years for. And now China is offering that same model for every country which wants to cooperate with that perspective. The new Silk Road is based on a win-win perspective. That is, that each country which participates in it has equal economic, cultural and political benefits. It is a true idea to overcome geopolitics, that evil which caused 2 world wars in the 20th century. It offers the perspective of a true global development partnership, of all of mankind working together for the common aims of mankind. Now we have produced a 370-page study which is called The New Silk Road Becomes the World Land Bridge. Now that book you want to read. It exists already in English, in Chinese and in Arabic. And very soon it will be out in German, in Korean and many other languages to follow. Watch this video and you will get a glimpse how easy it is to change the world for the better.
When Helga Zepp-LaRouche traveled to China in 1996 with a proposal for what she and her husband Lyndon LaRouche called the Eurasian Land Bridge, she arrived with a forecast that if the nations of Europe and Eurasia failed to economically integrate the disparate regions of the continent, powerful political and economic forces, in order to preserve their post-World War II hegemony, would exploit the weaknesses of these underdeveloped regions and destabilize the major continental powers, in particular Russia and China. 20 years later, in a world where systemic economic crises and proxy warfare have become the new normal, it is not hyperbole to say that we are, as a planet, at the end of that post-World War II paradigm. Now, a handful of world leaders are proposing a change of course, and in doing so are fundamentally challenging the underlying axioms which have shaped the last century of global economic policy. Is it in a nation's interest to be the global hegemon on the planet? If a nation's or group of nations' defense policy creates a less secure planet, is it really effective? In what economic interest is it that entire populations and their continents remain malnourished and underdeveloped? Chinese President Xi Jinping's proposal for win-win cooperation on the One Belt, One Road initiative is an offer to change this paradigm, making an offer to all nations, friend and foe, to recognize that it is in each other's vital interests that every nation develop economically, culturally, and spiritually. And while the majority of the world's population has signaled their readiness to commit to a new win-win paradigm, the Chinese have no illusions about the implications of calling for a new global economic order. In the 3 years since Xi Jinping first announced the Eurasian Land Bridge Belt and Road Strategy at Nazarbayev University, China has made significant progress bringing European nations on board. However, while rebuilding these land and sea trade routes across Eurasia will dramatically improve the global economy, the initiative is not yet a global one. Significant geopolitical hurdles remain. For a true win-win global paradigm, the transatlantic region must recognize their inherent interests in this new economic order. But what will it take for these nations to see partners where it now only sees adversaries? Who in the West shares a vision of the common aims of mankind? Those answers and more can be found in the EIR Special Report, The New Silk Road Becomes the World Land Bridge. Let us take a tour of the World Land Bridge and see what a truly global win-win paradigm can look like. The 65 countries along the One Belt, One Road account for 63% of the world's population, a total of 4.4 billion people. But their output makes up only 29% of total world output. Similarly, China's GDP has exceeded half of the total GDP of all these One Belt, One Road countries, which means that if coordinated properly, the economic engine of the Chinese economy will unlock the potential lying underutilized along the One Belt, One Road route. The European continent is generally associated with a high standard of living, a vast transportation network of roads, waterways, and rail, abundant electricity, and a rich history, a crucial part of which was a once high point of trade with the ancient Silk Road. But at what expense did Europe achieve and maintain this standard of living? And at what cost will it defend it? Has Europe and their allies' economic hegemony undermined the security of others, and by doing so, now compromised their own? The migration of over 1 million refugees from the Middle East and North Africa into Europe today demonstrates unarguably that the answer is yes. And while the conditions these refugees are fleeing are rapidly deteriorating, so too are the conditions in Europe. Since the end of the Cold War, Europe's loyalty to the City of London and Wall Street has sabotaged its own ability to sustain its standard of living. Today, Europe suffers from soaring youth unemployment and a chronic debt and austerity crisis, all of which is giving rise to extremist political organizations and cracking the facade of European unification. As China is currently demonstrating with its One Belt, One Road initiative, one of the greatest investments a country can make for its own security and prosperity is securing the stability and advancement of its neighbors. Such is also the case for Europe. The greatest improvement for Europe will be the coordinated development of Africa and the Middle East with the European continent. Two key features of the World Land Bridge Europe-Africa integration are: one, an extensive plan to upgrade Greece and the Balkan countries with a network of transportation, power, and water routes, utilizing its geostrategic location in the Eastern Mediterranean to become an active gateway between Eurasia to the north and Africa and Southwest Asia to the south. Second, completing the missing link between the two continents at the Strait of Gibraltar with a 25-mile tunnel connecting Spain and Morocco. Here, Spain, already a leader in high-speed rail, will no longer be at the edge of Europe, but will become a hub for a multitude of cultures and economic exchange. In this new paradigm, Africa requires allies, not NGOs. They want access to abundant, cheap electricity, not appropriate technology. In this new paradigm, Africa must be seen as the rich yet underutilized continent that it is, not a burden or a place to send aid, as many commonly think today. The vast potential of the continent can be unlocked with a few key projects. First, the Transaqua project. This project would divert 5% or 100,000 cubic meters of fresh water per year from the Congo River to Lake Chad. Refilling the lake will provide Central Africa hydropower, irrigation for agriculture, waterway transport, and will relieve the region's present landlocked condition. A second project, conceived over a century ago, is a dedicated rail line running from Dakar, Senegal on the Atlantic coast, across the continent to Port Sudan on the Red Sea. The main line passes through Senegal, Mali, Niger, Chad, and Sudan, connecting the Indian and Pacific Oceans. In total, a 14,000-kilometer network of rail. And a third project, authored by Egyptian engineer Ayman Rashid, is the Africa Pass, featuring 2 development corridors which integrate the water and transportation potential of the continent. The Africa Pass connects the Great Lakes nation's agricultural output to modern roads and high-speed rail, leading to a major modern seaport at Sidi Barrani on the Libyan-Egypt border. This overdue connection creates an export outlet for agricultural products now being wasted for lack of access to markets and storage. The Africa Pass also outlines a 3,800-kilometer irrigation canal extending from the highlands in eastern Congo northward through the Central African Republic, South and North Sudan, and into Egypt to fill the Qatar Depression west of Cairo. The success and advancement of Egypt is not only key for Africa, but also for the Middle East. These 2 regions of the world have suffered the greatest under the current paradigm, and they have the most to benefit from a new one.
All the advantages of this region has been turned into disadvantages because it has become the center of global conflict and proxy wars.
Hussein Askari, a longtime collaborator of Lyndon and Helga LaRouche, translated the report into Arabic and traveled to Egypt for its debut in March of 2016.
This is a unique area. There's no place on Earth which has the unique characteristics of the region in the zone. It's in between 3 continents. It has more than 2/3 of the world oil and gas reserves, but more importantly, it has more than 450 million people. Most of them are under the age of 30. So you have the whole future in front of them.
One of the main routes of the New Silk Road passes through Central Asia and Iran, through Turkey and into Europe. Sub-branches of this route are already under consideration, including Iranian plans to extend rail eastward to Baghdad, then further along the Tigris and Euphrates rivers to Syria. The rail line along the Euphrates can be connected to the maritime Silk Road through the Persian Gulf and the port of Basra in southern Iraq, and northwest towards Deir ez-Zor, Raqqa, and the ancient trading city of Aleppo. This route, built in cooperation with Iraq, will be a big step toward regional integration and a development corridor between the Persian Gulf, the Arabian Sea, and Indian Ocean, with the Eastern Mediterranean and southern Europe. A rail connection to Tehran will also provide Syria access to the Caspian Sea region, intersecting the new Chabahar port project, a joint Iranian, Russian, Indian economic corridor from India by sea to the port of Chabar in Iran, northward by rail into Central Asia and onto Russia. The stabilization of this region of the planet will stabilize the world as a whole. From here, the potential integration with the world by land and sea is immense. Putting its own win-win cooperation to the test, China is proposing real development, not simply aid, to its southern neighbors in Southeast Asia. China has offered to extend its impressive high-speed rail network south, integrating the large populations of Southeast Asia into the One Belt, One Road corridor. Construction of the long-planned Kunming to Singapore rail corridor is now moving forward, due in large part to financing and construction contributions from China. The Central Line will cross Laos and Thailand before heading south to Malaysia's capital, Kuala Lumpur. The Eastern Line will run through Vietnam and Cambodia before linking up with the Central Line in Bangkok. The Western Line will cross more of southwestern China and much of Myanmar before joining up at the hub in Bangkok. far busier than the current poorly maintained land routes in Southeast Asia, are at sea corridors. Nearly a quarter of all the world's traded goods travel through the narrow straits of Malacca, the main shipping channel between the Indian and Pacific Oceans. With even short-term growth projections for the region showing full saturation and unsafe levels of congestion, alternative routes are being considered as part of the One Belt, One Road Maritime Silk Road initiative. One such route, long championed by Lyndon and Helga LaRouche and featured in the EIR report, is the Craw Canal. Not only would the canal's construction and operation provide a dramatic and lasting upgrade to Thailand's economy, due to its strategic location, this simple 30-mile-long waterway would boost the overall efficiency of trade worldwide. As part of the transatlantic, the United States is also associated with a high standard of living. However, the Wall Street-dominated post-World War II paradigm has taken its toll on the U.S. economy and its people. Scrapping its agro-industrial sector for financial and services industries with the promise that it would make for a more competitive economy, high-earning, skilled work was outsourced to cheaper markets abroad, which don't provide a living wage for its workers. This flawed version of globalization lowered the productivity of the Americas as a whole, increased the rate of poverty throughout the hemisphere, and invited billions of dollars of illicit money flows from the global drug trade, which to this day represent a significant portion of the cash on hand in the Western banking sector. However, even after the 2007-2008 crisis, when the bankruptcy of the transatlantic financial system could no longer be covered up and needed an emergency bailout,
this is not just about Lehman Brothers. These problems are not limited to Wall Street or even Main Street. This is a crisis for the global economy.
No serious structural reforms have been made to the Western financial establishment, putting the West and the rest of the world at risk of an even greater crisis. No wonder that in recent years, China, Russia, and other emerging economies have begun to create new international financial institutions based on a concept of win-win relations among nations and created to facilitate economic development and trade for all participants instead of preserving the hegemony of some. Instead of the exclusivity of U.S. trade agreements like the Trans-Pacific Partnership, China has extended an invitation to the U.S. and the rest of the Americas to join them in establishing a new era of global economic development.
I stated very clearly to President Obama that China will be firmly committed to the path of peaceful development, and China will be firm in deepening reform and opening up the country wide.
But can the U.S. envision a world where it is no longer the sole superpower and instead shares that responsibility with other nations?
And will work hard to push forward the noble cause of peace and development for all mankind.
The potential for U.S. participation in the New Silk Road program is immense. One key project featured in EIR's New Silk Road report is finally connecting the Eurasian continent with North America at the Bering Strait. A Bering Strait link provides the needed symmetry to make the One Belt, One Road strategy a global one, and would transform the two continents the same way the ancient Silk Road opened up Europe to Asia. Imagine boarding a magnetically levitated train in downtown Paris or Berlin, traveling 250 miles per hour across the steppes of Siberia, through a tunnel below the Bering Strait, emerging on the other side in Alaska on your way to Manhattan. Layered with the freight and passenger rail line running north-south from Alaska to the lower 48 states from Eurasia is the construction of the long-awaited North American Water and Power Alliance, an Apollo-era continental water management system that takes freshwater runoff from Alaska and Canada and diverts it southward for use in the arid southwest United States. And while the average American will tell you these projects are impossible, the average Chinese today is building them. In the last decade, China, comparable in size to the United States, has constructed over 11,000 miles of high-speed rail and seeks to triple that number by 2020. Similarly, China's Three Gorges Dam and South Water North projects are some of the greatest water infrastructure endeavors ever undertaken. In the new win-win paradigm, big infrastructure investment is the new normal, everywhere. Inspired by the Suez Canal project recently completed in Egypt and the promise of maritime integration with the new paradigm One Belt, One Road and BRICS nations, another project featured in the World Land Bridge Report is now underway. The Nicaraguan government has won an uphill battle to build a 173-mile interoceanic canal across its country, creating a passageway for some of the world's largest shipping vessels, which currently cannot pass through the Panama Canal. A revitalized North American water and rail system would be incomplete without integration into Central and South America. Plans for an east-west transcontinental rail line from Brazil to Peru are already underway with Chinese investment. In a global economic paradigm geared towards economic integration and development, South America could develop a continent-wide rail network for the 21st century. Still, there are many who say this vision is just a dream, that it's impossible. However, those nations where today's great powers are battling it out in geopolitical proxy wars, like Yemen and Syria, will tell you that it is the current paradigm which is impossible and cannot continue. Constructing the World Land Bridge would mean an economic and cultural renaissance for the planet, a new paradigm for mankind. The projects and key economic concepts laid out in this report are truly the blueprint from which leading governments around the world are working. The challenge now is bringing the United States back to its roots and transforming it into a powerful ally of this new economic order.